Madam Speaker, ma'am, I hereby present the 2025 Mid-Term Budget and Economic Review Statement. This statement has been produced in line with the prescribed budget process calendar as outlined in the Public Finance Management General Regulations of 2019, published in Statutory Instrument 135 of 2019, as read with Public Finance Management General Amendment Regulations of 2021, published in Statutory Instrument 127A of 2021. These regulations require the Minister responsible for Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion to provide the mid-year fiscal review no later than 31st of July. Madam Speaker, ma'am, today is 31st of July. Madam Speaker, ma'am, on the 18th of December 2024, Parliament approved the 2025 Government Financial Plan, the national budget running under the theme Building Resilience for Sustained Economic Transformation. Its implication, rather its implementation during the first half of the year was on course despite the fast-changing global environment. Notwithstanding, domestic economic developments are upbeat on account of a better than anticipated agricultural season and improved electricity generation at Kariba Hydropower Station. This, combined with sustained economic stability, has provided a conducive domestic economic environment. Madam Speaker, ma'am, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, a recipient of a Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, postulates that, I quote, sustained macroeconomic stability is essential for achieving long-term economic development and reducing poverty, and we want to follow that path of sustained macroeconomic stability going forward. A few words about the global and regional economic outlook, Madam Speaker, ma'am. The global economic growth is now projected at 2.8%, down from 3.2%. We made that forecast in October 2024, and things have changed. And this is according to the IMF World Economic Outlook Report of April 2025. And this downward revision is on account of anticipated increases in trade tariffs and geopolitical tensions in Europe and in the Middle East. Madam Speaker, there is a slide, I hope it can be seen from that far in terms of the numbers. You can see that indeed the growth projection for 2025 is 2.8%. Advanced economies like the US at 1.8%, Euro area 0.8%, Sub-Saharan Africa 3.8%, and Zimbabwe at 6%, China at 4% economic growth for 2025. In Sub-Saharan Africa, economic growth is projected to decline from the initial projection of 4.2% in October 2024 down to 3.8% by year end. The downward revision is attributed to the negative effects of weather shocks, weak global demand, declining commodity prices, and tighter financial conditions. Again, on the screen is additional numbers on pertaining to Sub-Saharan Africa and then also some of the SADC countries. Similarly, GDP growth of the Southern Africa Development Community SADC is projected at 2.8% in 2025. And again, this is a downward revision from the October 24 forecast of 3.3%. And again, you can see how Zimbabwe is juxtaposed against its peers in the region, Botswana with a negative growth rate of 0.4%, which is slightly worse than last year at minus 3%, or slightly better actually, but still negative. Lesotho 1.5%, for example, Zimbabwe 6%, Tanzania 6%. So those are some of the faster growing countries. Turning on to the domestic economic developments and outlook, Madam Speaker, before I turn to domestic economic developments, let me take this opportunity to brief you on the recent GDP rebasing exercise and the results of the economic census carried out by Zimstat, our statistics bureau. The size of the economy is now approximately $45.7 billion US dollars, up from the earlier estimate of $35.2 billion, and this is a 2024 figure. This implies that both GDP and GNI per capita are now slightly above 3,000 US dollars per capita. Madam Speaker, again, I've got a table that shows all figures for 2023, the new figures for 2023, and then the 2024 all figures and new figures, and we can see this dramatic improvement in the size of our economy, which implies that all along we've been under-measuring or mismeasuring the size of this economy. It's much bigger than we think. As a result, the revenue to GDP ratio declines to around 15% of GDP from historical levels of about 18%. Public debt to GDP in US dollar terms also declines to about 46.5% from a level above 60%. And it's also now well below the sub-Saharan average of 61%. Madam Speaker, ma'am, in 2013, the debt to GDP ratio average for Africa was of the order of 30%, but now it is 61%. And I'm pleased to say Zimbabwe is much better at about 46.5% as of end of 2024. In terms of sectoral contribution, the structure of the economy is now dominated by the manufacturing sector at 15.3%, mining and quarrying at 14.5%, wholesale and retail trade at 11.9%, financial and insurance services at 10.8%, and the agricultural sector at 9.3%. Here I'm just highlighting the top 5 sectors in our new GDP structure. I've compared that table. We compare the new structure compared to the old sectoral contribution. And it's pleasing to see that sectors that are value-adding, such as manufacturing, are now contributing above mere retail, the retail sector, which was the biggest before. Madam Speaker, ma'am, now I turn to the domestic economic developments during the first half of 2025. Given the positive economic development during the period January to June, we are confident that the projected economic growth of 6% alluded to in 2025's national budget is achievable. And again, on that screen, Madam Speaker, we show the final figure at the bottom of 6%, but then also show the various sectors that contribute to that growth. Notice that the bulk of this growth is really coming from recovery in the agricultural sector, which has recovered from a growth rate of minus 18.1% in 2024, and this year it should be up to positive 21.5%. Of course, the other sectors are all showing positive growth, but that's the sector that is contributing the most due to its spectacular recovery this year. All sectors of the economy are expected to record positive growth in 2025, mainly on account of a favorable agriculture season, improved electricity generation, stable exchange rate and inflation. This is notwithstanding declining international mineral commodity prices and a subdued global economic environment. Let me turn to inflation and the exchange rate. Madam Speaker, ma'am, month-on-month ZIG inflation has been stable during the first half of the year, as it averaged around 0.5% per month. And on an annual basis, the rate rose to 85.7% in April 2025 to 92.5% in June, largely driven by the base effect. The annual inflation rate is expected to decline significantly from October 2025 as the base effect subsides. Here we had a sharp depreciation in the currency in September last year. That's the base effect. That's having an effect on year-on-year inflation, Madam Speaker, ma'am. We can see again a chart of what inflation looks like on a month-on-month basis, that we are far from the peak that we saw in October, when I was at 0.5%, a big improvement. The stability of the exchange rate explains the low average month-on-month inflation of 0.5% experienced over the past 5 months of the year. The exchange rate has averaged $1 to 26.7 ZiG on the willing buyer, willing seller foreign exchange market over that same period. Let me turn to the external sector. Madam Speaker, the country's external sector position has demonstrated remarkable resilience, as evidenced by the notable increase in foreign currency receipts, which rose by 30.2% to $6 billion for the period from January to May 2025. This is compared to $4.9 billion received during the same period in 2024. This again clear from the slide. We can see the biggest change was in export proceeds there was in loan proceeds, 35.1%, and then we have got even remittances, diaspora remittances, with a growth rate of 9.8%. The total showing a very healthy growth in our external position. The current account balance remained in surplus during the first quarter of 2025, registering $19.9 million. To year end, the current account surplus is projected to reach about $621.7 million US dollars. The growth in foreign currency receipts is primarily being driven by an increase in export receipts, particularly in gold exports, which was $2 billion US dollars during the first 6 months of this year. Diaspora remittances is at $924.2 million US dollars during the first 5 months, and loans to the private sector at $1.1 billion US dollars during the first 5 months. I now turn to monetary and financial sector developments. The banking sector remains stable, underpinned by robust capitalization, satisfactory asset quality and profitability, as well as strong liquidity positions. Credit to the private sector grew by 20% compared to December 2024. This is by May 2025 figures. This was likely driven by targeted credit to the productive sectors of the economy. In terms of asset quality, non-performing loans stood at 3.3% as of March 2025, which are below the 5% international threshold or benchmark. The monetary developments, both reserve and, let me take that again, on monetary developments, both reserve and broad money growth during the first half of the year were in line with the observed and desired growth path of the economy and inflation target. A few words on the stock markets. There is growing interest by companies to participate on the stock market, is indicated by increase of the number of listings on both the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, ZSC, and the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, VFEX. As a result, both the ZSC and VFEX recorded positive turnover during the first 5 months of the year. I now turn to public debt. Madam Speaker, the country's stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt stood at 576.5 billion ZiG as at end of March 2025. The debt was comprised of external debt totaling 337.7 billion ZiG and domestic debt amounting to 238.8 billion ZiG, representing 58.6% and 41.6% respectively. There's a slide there, 11, showing those figures. In US dollar terms, the total public and publicly guaranteed debt as at end of March 2025 amounted to $21.5 billion US dollars, comprising external debt of $12.6 billion and domestic debt at $8.9 billion. This brings the debt to GDP ratio to 44% as of 31 March 2025. In this regard, government is implementing the arrears clearance and debt resolution roadmap in order to restore debt sustainability and unlock critical external financing needed for the country's development programs. Let me now turn to the 2025 National Budget Fiscal Framework. Madam Speaker, the 2025 National Budget approved by Parliament on 18 December 2024 was premised on a macro fiscal framework with the projected GDP growth of 6%. And we can see that on that table on the screen. And then revenue collections were 270.3 billion ZWG, or 19.9% of GDP, and overall expenditures, 276.4 billion ZWG, which is 20.1% of GDP, as well as a budget deficit of 6.1 billion ZWG, which is 0.4% of GDP. So that's the macro fiscal framework. In US dollar terms, the fiscal framework translates to revenues of $7.5 billion with expenditures of $7.7 billion and a budget deficit of $168.4 million, which is 0.4% of GDP. Let me now turn to the budget performance so far. Madam Speaker, during the first half of the year of 2025, both inflation and the exchange rate were relatively more stable than envisaged. The budget has therefore been performing below projections in terms of revenues in local currency. Although performance was significantly above target in US dollar or foreign currency terms, it's mainly an exchange rate effect. Revenue collections during the period January to June amounted to 101.2 billion ZWG, or $3.7 billion equivalent. This is against a target of 118.1 billion ZWG, or $3.3 billion equivalent. While expenditures were 98 billion ZWG, which is $3.7 billion against a target of 127.5 billion ZWG, which is equivalent to $3.5 billion US dollars. Again, those figures are shown on the screen. Madam Speaker, in terms of budget utilization up to June 2025, 35% of the appropriated and approved budget has been spent. And there on the screen again you can see how it's been spent across various ministries. Some of the ministries have been utilizing it quite fast. They have a high burn rate of their budget, and some of them not as high of a burn rate. But we will endeavor to push forward to make sure that everyone catches up with those who are moving faster. Madam Speaker, the remaining balance of the budget, which is 65%, we feel is therefore adequate to cater for government's operations to year-end in the absence of any external or domestic significant shocks. Let me give a highlight of some of the key areas. Let me start with social services. Madam Speaker, during the first 6 months of the year, government spent 26.6 billion towards the provision of social services under the following sectors: education at 16.1 billion ZWG, health at 7 billion ZWG, and social protection at 3.5 billion ZWG. Zooming onto education, 16.1 billion was expended on the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, of which 12.1 billion went towards compensation of employees for the period January to May 2025. This also includes resources meant to support various programs such as the school feeding program, BEAM and others, and the procurement of sanitary ware. Government also supported the ongoing construction of 5 new schools, namely the E.D. Mnangagwa Secondary School in Mutoko, the Mariga Primary School in Mbira, the Twai Primary School in Bulilima, Sonkwa Primary School in Binga, and Mafungautsa Secondary School in Gokwe South. This is the Twai Secondary School in the Bulilima area. As you can see, it's now at roof level, but the roof will still to come on, but we're almost there. Let me turn to the higher and tertiary education sector, Madam Speaker. In 2025 national budget, the Minister of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development was allocated a total of 5.7 billion ZIG to enhance access to quality, equitable and inclusive education, including students with disabilities. As at the end of June 2025, 1.6 billion had been spent on operations of universities and colleges. On infrastructure, focus was on completing ongoing projects at the University of Zimbabwe, at the National University of Science and Technology, NUST, Midland State University, Bindura University of Science Education, and Gwanda State University. I think that's the Techno-Innovation Center at NUST. And the next slide is the Great Zimbabwe University Chivi Traditional Grains Processing Plant to support innovation in that sector, and beneficiation in that sector. I now turn to the health sector. Madam Speaker, the health sector received support amounting to 7 billion ZIG, with the bulk, which is 5.7 billion ZIG, expended on compensation of employees, and 1.1 billion ZIG was spent on goods and services, including 0.6 billion ZIG for procurement of medical supplies and services. Madam Speaker, it's again worth pausing. These letters are a little bit small, but if they were bigger, you would see that there are some very important projects that are being undertaken. For instance, the renovations being carried out at Salimugabe Hospital, and then at UBH, the construction of a water tank, Beibridge Hospital, bore was drilled, and then in Gwanda Hospital, there's renovation of a theater, and Masingo Hospital, again, a lot of work is being done in Binga, in Gokwe North Health. So a lot is happening in some of these key and critical health sector institutions, Madam Speaker, across the entire country. Let me turn to some of the social benefits, just to mention that, Madam Speaker, cumulative disbursements towards supporting vulnerable members of our society stood at 3.5 billion towards programs such as the Vulnerable Agriculture Input Scheme, or from Vudra into us a program, the BEAM program, Food Deficit Mitigation Program, and supporting our War Veterans Affairs Fund. Turning to women, gender equity, and SMEs, Madam Speaker, during the first half of the year, government supported gender mainstreaming interventions with the objective of, one of the objectives is to eradicate gender-based violence, GBV, and here we expended an amount of 98.3 million ZIG. This went towards the construction of one-stop centers, capacitation of the National Handicrafts Center of Zimbabwe, and provision of workspaces for women engaging in various businesses, among others. And that's a picture of the textile manufacturing sector in Bulawayo to support women's entrepreneurship activities. Turning to youth, sports, arts and culture area, here, Madam Speaker, I want to highlight work on the National Sports Stadium. The process of refurbishing the National Sports Stadium is now at an advanced stage, with the following notable achievements having been realized. The installation of bucket seats is now at 90% completion. Reconstruction works on new turf currently underway, with works currently at 40% completion. Completion of the installation of turnstiles at Gate 1 entrance, and then completion of the cabling and tubing for the venue operating systems, and finally, restoration of the water reticulation system, which is in progress. And that's one area where we are pushing hard to complete. The budget also extended, I must say, 28.1 million, Madam Speaker, towards this issue of drug and substance abuse, which is mainly affecting our youth. Let me turn to veterans of the liberation struggle. In line with the Second Republic's vision of inclusive economic participation and empowerment of veterans of the liberation struggle, government operationalized the Veterans Investment Corporation and launched a livestock person scheme as well. In addition, the government allocated residential stands and undertook training programs to our veterans community as part of empowerment initiatives. Government also extended resources towards benefits of veterans of the liberation struggle, inclusive of education, medical and funeral assistance. Let me give you a picture of the overall infrastructure expenditure, which includes obviously ICT and the digital economy as well. Madam Speaker, cumulative expenditures on all infrastructure projects to June 2025 amounted to 15.7 billion ZIG, targeting projects in the energy, transport, water and sanitation, housing, health, education and agricultural sectors, as well as devolution. And those figures are shown on the screen. A further amount of 2.1 billion was expended on capacitation of ministries, departments and agencies through the procurement of vehicles, furniture and equipment. Turning to the transport sector specifically, Madam Speaker, a cumulative amount of 7.9 billion was spent on the transport sector, mainly towards the road development program. During the period under review, priority was accorded to the completion of new modern multi-level Trabablas interchange, which was commissioned by His Excellency the President, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, on 30th of May 2025. And you can see a picture of the majestic Trabablas interchange here in our capital city, Harare. And more of these Trabablases will be built right across the country. The rehabilitation and upgrading of the Bulawayo Victoria Falls Road has commenced, Madam Speaker, ma'am, with contractors already on site and are currently carrying out preliminary works on multi-segments of the highway, including land clearance to create some detours. The Rural Infrastructure Development Agency, RIDA, rehabilitated and upgraded various road projects across the country. Madam Speaker, again, if you turn to the screen, these are some of the roads, for example. The Chipinge Mount Selinda Road in Manicaland in Chipinge District, 10 kilometers was completed by RIDA. I'll just pick another on Bulawayo Nkai, which is a very emotional project. There's some movement, 3.6 kilometers has been primed. And then Nyanga Ruangwe Road, for example, in Nyanga, 10 kilometers has been completed. And on the Gokwe Road, 40 kilometers overlay with asphalt has been also completed. So RIDA is doing its work, Madam Speaker, ma'am, and supporting the Minister of Transport as well as Zinara in our road development program. I now turn to the water and sanitation area. Madam Speaker, ma'am, during the period under review, an amount of 3.9 billion was released towards water and sanitation sector, focusing on dam construction, rural bore drilling, and establishment of village business units in order to enhance access to clean water and promote local economic development. The main priority projects were Kunzi and Gwai Shangani dams, which are essential for improving water supply in major centers. So that's Kunzi Dam to supply Harare with water, Madam Speaker, ma'am, under construction. Then that's the Gwai Shangani Dam, which again is still under construction and will complete it. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the Presidential Rural Development Program targeted drilling and installation of solarized boreholes, water supply and establishment of village business units. To date, the following milestones have been achieved throughout the country under this program. You can see already the Nyamuroro Secondary School in Gokwe. That's a village business unit. But overall, we have 296 balls that have been drilled, 362 balls that have been installed, 26 water supply projects established, 182 village business units established, and Nyamuroro is one example. And we've also established 152, or rather the establishment of 152 business units is currently underway. Those are in progress, and we'll report on them when I present in November, Madam Speaker, ma'am. Let me turn to the energy sector. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the Rural Electrification Fund, REF, expended 16.3 million ZIG, 216.3 million ZIG, enabling the completion of 114 energy projects in primary and secondary schools, rural health centers, government extension offices, business centers and villages, among others. And you can see these units, 114 in total. If you go down to the bottom right, extreme right, province by province, you can see where these projects have been installed: primary school, secondary, rural, and so forth, totally 114. Meanwhile, and this is an example of the Boni Rural Health Center, for example. Meanwhile, Zimbabwe has developed an energy compact with the African Development Bank and the World Bank under the Mission 300 initiative. The aim is to ensure all citizens have access to reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy by 2030. And this energy compact is due to be signed off and launched in an event during the UN General Assembly in September next month, or rather in September, in New York. It will be launched by our head of state, and he will join other heads of states in doing that. Madam Speaker, ma'am, the budget and the Universal Services Fund, I'm now talking to the ICT issues. The budget and the Universal Services Fund provided resources amounting to 436.9 million and 54.3 million ZIG, respectively, to support the development of digital infrastructure. Notable progress was made in modernizing government ICT systems through the establishment of a secure, smart government private cloud. The Minister of ICT successfully connected 30 health facilities in Gokwe North using low Earth orbit satellite broadband, a milestone highlighted during the 45th independence celebrations. In addition, efforts to upgrade the National Data Center to Tier 4 standards are ongoing, targeting 99.999% uptime for critical government digital systems. A bit more on information, publicity and broadcasting, Madam Speaker, ma'am. To enhance access to information and citizens' participation in national governance and promotion of real-time dissemination, government is implementing the Zim Digital Phase 2, focusing on the installation of transmitters across the country. On the other hand, the Lieja Community Radio Station was operationalized in Hwange in February 2025. Government also launched the media policy during the first half of the year. The policy is designed to promote media excellence, diversity, and general national development. A few words on housing delivery, Madam Speaker, ma'am. Government spent 746.7 million ZIG towards housing delivery during the period under review. But I can assure you, Madam Speaker, ma'am, the private sector spent a lot more, so did private citizens, on housing development. This enabled the completion and commissioning of, for example, of Mtawa Tower Magistrate Court in Uzumba, Baramba, Fungwe. You can see this is the Mtawa Tower Magistrate Court, for example. In addition, and this is our Tombo flats, and then the recently commissioned Chiboyo flats here in Harare at the police depot. In addition, renovations and construction of diplomatic properties were undertaken in Abuja, Berlin, London, and Pretoria. A few words about an important sector, which is around peace and security. In order to enhance peace and security of the country, an amount of 14 billion ZIG was expended on the security sector. The resources were spent on salaries and allowances, on mobility and housing, and in providing tools of trade, as well as servicing of equipment and infrastructure development. Development partners, Madam Speaker, also made a contribution to our resources, amounting to $148.1 million during the first half of the year, and this was mainly targeted at our health sector, emergency response, and the education sectors. Again, there's a slide showing the various contributions for development partners across various sectors. Let me turn to an issue that will become a key focus area in the second half of this year, Madam Speaker, the issue of the cost of doing business. During the second half of the year, government will be seized with the implementation of the doing business reforms aimed at reducing cost and enhancing competitiveness. Meanwhile, government has with immediate effect begun the process of reviewing various regulatory fees and charges. In addition, the number of bureaucratic steps and compliance requirements will be drastically reduced, and we'll be making announcements as we go along, sector by sector. And we want to begin with the agricultural sector with announcement in the next week or two. On the fiscal front, government will continue to review the existing tax system with a view to reducing reported and observed distortions, grant the necessary supportive regime for business growth and competitiveness within and on the regional and international markets without compromising fiscal sustainability. For the medium term, government is pursuing a medium-term revenue strategy that clearly defines the growth trajectory for the revenue to GDP ratio and specific strategies to achieve the desired outcome, including efforts to bring the non-compliant informal sector or small businesses, I call them, bringing those into the formal economy. Let me give an update on the formulation of NDS 2, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, government is in the process of formulating the National Development Strategy 2, NDS 2. 10 national priority areas have been identified, and chairpersons and co-chairpersons for each of the thematic working groups have been appointed. Terminal evaluation of NDS 1 is underway, which will inform NDS 2 formulation by assessing the achievements, lessons learned, and implementation gaps of NDS 1. The public consultations have begun with the launch of the final blueprint set for November 2025, just before the presentation of the 2026 national budget. There is therefore going to be a strong link between the 2026 national budget and the National Development Strategy 2, or NDS 2. I now transition to the conclusion, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, the performance of the economy and the budget during the first half of the year was within the approved levels by Parliament. The macro-fiscal framework underpinning the approved 2025 national budget remains relevant and still supports the targeted project and programs. To ensure that the fiscal policy is complementary to monetary policy in order to sustain the prevailing price and exchange rate stability, the government will continue to implement prudent budgeting policy stance, which ensures that all expenditures are strictly guided by the performance of revenues. This entails a continuity of the principle of living within our means. Madam Speaker, the country has enjoyed economic stability during the first half of the year, and I want to assure you and the honourable members here present and the public at large that both the fiscal and monetary authorities are going to stay the course. We all understand the cost and pain of instability, and so we cannot afford any policy slippages. During the second half of the year, government will be seized with the implementation of the ease of doing business reforms, targeting the reduction of fees and charges as well as regulatory requirements, a number of steps in acquiring licenses, for example. This will significantly reduce the operational costs of the industry to enable it to compete both domestically and internationally. Madam Speaker, ma'am, we have a situation in some sectors where players or private players are only profitable if they don't comply with regulatory requirements. If they comply, they make losses. And that situation needs to be changed. We will lower the cost of doing business. Madam Speaker, ma'am, I now commend the 2025 midterm budget and economic review to this august House in compliance with the law, and it is accompanied by the following documents: the 2025 midterm budget and economic review statement, 2, the 2026 budget strategy paper, 3, the citizen document which simplifies the midterm budget and economic review statement, and then 4, the public debt report to Parliament for 2024 financial year, and then finally a booklet on the structured dialogue platform on Zimbabwe's arrears clearance and debt resolution process. This is not a requirement for tabling in Parliament, but I thought that we should keep our honourable members of Parliament informed. Madam Speaker, ma'am, I thank you. Tinotenda siyabonga.
Thank you, Honourable Minister of Finance. The question before the House is a motion by the Honourable Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion that this House takes note of the 2025 midterm budget and economic review